Hello, hi. I I really want to send my best wishes for the May until 18 Memorial Foundation for the International Symposium Gwangju Asia Forum. When I was invited to participate in this important symposium, I was very enthusiastic to visit for the first time South Korea. And it's sad to realize that the forum couldn't be held. So in these weird and awkward times of global pandemic, I send all of you my best wishes, and I hope all of you are doing well despite the pandemic. And I think as a human rights activist, we really need to show strength and solidarity and keep moving and working together around the globe in order to stay together and strengthen the movement. In the case of this forum, I think it's very important to commemorate the 40th anniversary event of the May 18th Democratic Uprising. A friend of mine, South Korean student at that time, Taeon Baek, participated in that uprising, and he was detained for a long period in jail. He was in jail. So I really knew very close what happened there. I am here representing Center for Legal and Social Studies, CELS. It's a human rights organization founded during the last dictatorship that Argentina suffered from 1976 to 1993. Last year, we celebrated our 40th anniversary of CELS, and this presentation is the condensation of the work done by many individuals and workmates of CELS through the last 40 years. And particularly in this presentation, my colleagues Sol Urcade and Marcela Perelman have written and systematized this presentation particularly. As an introduction, I will describe briefly the last dictatorship, and then I will talk about the strategies of the Argentinian human rights movement to obtain justice and truth. The last civic military dictatorship in Argentina implemented a plan of clandestine repression. This plan was marked by kidnapping of people, 30,000 people, their illegal detention in clandestine detention centers, political prisoners, torture, sexual violence, the appropriation of children, and the murder and forced disappearances of thousands of victims. During this period, family members, survivors of repression, and human rights organizations denounced the responsibility of the state, both nationally through habeas corpus and criminal complaints, as well as internationally by going to the Inter-American human rights system and other forums like the UN system, demanding the appearances alive of those who were missing. Due to various factors, sustained denunciation of the crimes, economic and social crisis, the malicious and criminal war for the Malvinas Island, the Falkland Islands War, as the English refer to them, the transition from dictatorship to democracy in Argentina wasn't a negotiating transition, as happened in other Latin American countries like Brazil or Chile. But in spite of not being a negotiating transition before the end of the dictatorship, those responsible for crimes against humanity sought their impunity with a quotation pacification law, which basically consisted of a self-amnesty. This caused a great opposition from Argentinian society, and more, once democracy was restored, the law was declared null and void by Congress. The demand of human rights organizations when the democratic period started were focused in finding the truth and justice for those responsible of these crimes. On the contrary, the idea of reconciliation was neither a demand nor a horizon for the human rights movement. And you will say, why? Because the armed forces didn't admit their crimes or disclose the whereabouts of or fate of the disappeared or the abducted children to whom they forcibly changed their identity. Also because they justified their action by calling systematic and widespread repression against the population as a war. They proposed instead reconciliation as the equivalent to impunity and silence, to the concealment of truth. But let's go back now to the demand and strategy for the human rights movement. Once democracy was restored, some human rights organizations insisted on the establishment of the bicameral commission to which we have already referred. However, President-elect Alfonsín opted for the establishment. He set a truth commission composed of notables, and that commission was called National Commission on the Disappearances of Persons, called CONADEP. The mandate of CONADEP was, I quote, to clarify the facts relating to the disappearances of persons and to receive complaints and evidence that should be referred to the judiciary. Its work is recognized nationally and internationally to this day. Actually, it was one of the first, if not the first, truth commission in the world. But the mission and trust wasn't respected by the members of the armed and security forces at that time. The members of the commission during their investigation were threatened and monitored by the intelligence services. In its final report, called Never Again, the CONADEP referred to the term reconciliation in this way, and I quote, "In the course of our inquiries, we were insulted and threatened by those who committed the crimes, who far from repenting, repeat the well-known reason for the, quote, dirty war, the salvation of the homeland and its Western and Christian values, and they accuse us of not promoting national reconciliation, of activating hatred and resentment, of preventing oblivion. But it is not so. We are not moved by resentment or by the spirit of vengeance. We only ask for truth and justice, as, on the other hand, the church of different denominations have asked, understanding that here can be no reconciliation, but after repentance of the guilty and a justice that is based on the truth." End of quotation. Indeed, this extract shows how reconciliation was maliciously used as a synonym for impunity in Argentina. But let us continue with the process of memory, truth, and justice. President Alfonsín, in addition to forming the Truth Commission, ordered the prosecution of 9 members of the military junta who usurped power. The trial of the junta trial, was finally held before a civilian court that analyzed more than 700 cases and sentenced 5 of the military commanders. It was proved in this trial that armed forces imposed an illegal repressive system and committed mass abduction, torture, and killings. As investigation progressed, other investigation that was called in the ruling of this trial, there were increasing number of threats and military uprisings as a way to intimidate the government and the political and judicial system in general. It was in this context that the law of impunity, as are called in Argentina, the law of final point and due obedience were enacted, which set deadlines for criminal prosecution and created the presumption of due obedience for officers who execute the acts. Those laws were passed in the 1987 and 1988. And finally, impunity was consecrated in 1999 and 1990 with the issue of pardon decrees by the then President Carlos Menem. Among those pardoned were commanders convicted at the junta trial only 5 years ago and other military personnel who were undergoing judicial proceedings. So one of the things set as a foundation for this law was the objective of achieving national reconciliation. And as you can see again, the term reconciliation was being used to justify impunity. So the strategy for the human rights movement and the families of victims and other actors in Argentina to overcome this impunity policy were diverse. And on the first time, there was a legal strategy using national mechanism from national courts and the Supreme Court, challenged constitutionally of law and the presidential pardon. The seek of right to truth at national court, but also was international and regional, using the Inter-American system of human rights protection and the UN system as well. Actually, there were cases presented at the Inter-American system in both, looking for, asking for the Commission to declare the impunity laws were in violation of the Inter-American Convention, but also other cases looking for the protection of Argentinian state to the right to truth and right to justice. After, many years of this combination of national and international legal and political strategies, impunity broke down in 2001 when for the first time the laws of final point and due obedience were declared unconstitutional. This was achieved in a case involving human rights organizations, cells, and grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo. The judge of first instance and eventually in 2005, the Supreme Court declared the invalidity and unconstitutionality of the laws of impunity, the due obedience and final point laws. And the judgment considered the rights and obligation of international human rights law, particularly the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights and the standards set by the Inter-American Court on Human Rights in the case Barrios Altos of Peru in 2001. In this way, the justice process in Argentina was reopened, and as today, 226 sentences were handed down and 915 perpetrators were convicted. Also, 144 were acquitted. However, trial is not the only things that happen in Argentina. There are many policies during different governments, from the transition to the current days, that promote memory, public memory, sites of memory, museums, artistic production, music, movies, and so on. So it can be said that Argentinian process, Argentinian case for justice, memories, and truth, justice and memory, it goes from truth and justice with the CONADEP Commission and the military junta trial to a period of impunity, and then to retake the path of truth and justice until the current period. And it's important to say that it wasn't easy, and it took more than 30 years to get what we have now in terms of a strong sense of justice. We achieve a goal, like the society achieve a goal of justice of what happened during the dictatorship. And actually, every March 24th that we commemorate the coup d'etat, hundreds, thousands of people around the country take the streets in order to march and to commemorate the victims and to commemorate the democratic system that we are living for. And just to conclude, I'd like to point out some of the lessons that we have learned from the Argentinian process of memory, truth, and justice as a human rights activist. The first one is very important. It was very important to document human rights violations when they were occurred. For example, we used the habeas corpus presented to the dictatorship, knowing that it wasn't an effective remedy at that time, but that we were going to use later today. And they are very important evidence, legal evidence in the cases today. The victims that actually become political actors, and actually most of them are human rights leaders in Argentina, have participated actively in the judicial process. Actually, one important thing to have in consideration is that the strategy were both judicial, juridical, and political strategies at the same time, and actually national and international. The both levels have been combined depending opportunities and depending the political context. There is a need to identify allies. There was a need to identify allies both in the political system and in the judicial system as well. And to gain visibility, it was necessary to have a strategy of mobilization and communication. Actually, using only the courts wasn't enough in order to overcome the impunity policies, or actually the impunity ideas and strategy that the dictatorship had at the beginning. And finally, to think creatively. The obstacle can become opportunities for the creation of new strategies that it happened actually when the policies of impunity were in place, and we look forward for the right to truth at that time. In the recent history of our country, the trial of those responsible for human rights violation that acknowledge the truth about what's happening to disappear and appropriate children and the memory of what happened, undoubtedly constitute the hope for never again that guides Argentinian society. And actually, I hope that this sense of the Argentinian society embrace the democratic values and the democratic system will last for many, many years. And I hope that sharing this experience can be useful for societies like in South Korea, particularly in this time that they are celebrating the uprising, the 40th anniversary of the uprising at that time. And I really would like to continue this exchange. Thank you very much.